The velvet silence of the Thompson manor was broken not by a scream, but by the rhythmic, terrifying clink-clink-clink of a silver poker stirring the dying embers of the hearth. Victoria Langford stood tall, her silhouette cast in jagged, predatory lines against the mahogany walls, while 7-year-old Lily Thompson knelt on the Persian rug, her small hands trembling so violently they seemed to vibrate. Between Victoria's manicured fingers sat the only surviving photograph of Helena Thompson, the mother Lily had lost to a sudden illness only a year prior. It was a candid shot, Helena laughing in a garden, her eyes full of a life that Victoria had spent every waking second since the funeral trying to bury. "Please, Victoria," Lily whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the cavernous room. "It's all I have left. I'll do anything. I'll stay in the attic. I'll stop asking for stories. Just, please don't." Victoria didn't look at the child. She looked at the photo with a mask of aggressive arrogance, her pupils dilated with the sheer, intoxicating rush of absolute power. To Victoria, this wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a rival that refused to stay dead. As long as Lily held that image, Helena lived in the house, a ghost occupying the space Victoria wanted for her own vanity. With a slow, deliberate flick of her wrist, Victoria held the corner of the photograph over a rising tongue of orange flame. The heat licked the edges, the garden in the photo beginning to curl and blacken, turning Helena's smile into a charred void. "There is no anything left for you to do, Lily," Victoria hissed, her voice dripping with a cruel, clinical satisfaction. "In this house, memories are a luxury you can no longer afford. Your mother isn't coming back, and by the time I'm through, even the wind will have forgotten her name." The spark caught, the fire roared upward as if fed by the very malice in the room. In that singular, catastrophic moment, the photo hit the bed of glowing coals. Lily let out a strangled, breathless sob, her body collapsing inward as she watched her mother's face vanish into a swirl of grey ash. Victoria let out a low, melodic laugh, the sound of a victor standing over a fallen foe. She felt untouchable. She felt like a goddess who had just erased the past. What Victoria Langford did not know, what her ego-driven blindness prevented her from seeing, was that the single spark she had just ignited was not the end of a memory, but the beginning of a 20-year countdown to her own destruction. She was unaware that she had just destroyed the most vital piece of evidence in a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation, and even more unaware that every second of her perfect crime was being beamed in high definition to a darkened office 5 miles away. The living room was modern, sterile, and cold, reflecting the heart of the woman who now paced its floors. Victoria had spent months meticulously planning the total ego death of Lily Thompson. She wanted the girl broken, a shell that would never dare question the missing millions from the Thompson estate or the strange, late-night visitors Victoria received. She believed that by burning the photo, she was burning the only physical link to the secret Helena had died protecting. "Look at it, Lily," Victoria commanded, pointing the silver poker at the mound of grey flakes. "Look at what happens to things that don't belong to me." Lily didn't look away. Though her chest ached with a primal, hollow pain, her expression began to shift. The stoic vulnerability that had defined her for months started to harden. She crossed her arms tightly, her small frame going rigid. She wasn't just a victim anymore, she was a witness. She watched the fire consume the last of the garden, the last of the dress, the last of the numbers. The numbers! Victoria had been so blinded by her hatred for Helena's beauty that she hadn't even bothered to flip the photo over. She hadn't seen the fine, microscopic handwriting scrawled across the back in permanent ink. A string of 24 alphanumeric characters that served as the decryption key to a Swiss vault Helena had established before her illness took her. Victoria had spent 6 months tearing the house apart looking for those codes, never realizing the child was holding them in her hand every single night. Now those codes were smoke. To the average observer, the evidence was gone. Victoria certainly thought so. She turned away from the fireplace, smoothing her light blue silk dress, a color chosen to project innocence and calm, and headed toward the door. "Go to your room, Lily, and if I hear one sound, I'll burn the clothes on your back next." As the door clicked shut, the silence returned to the room, but it was a heavy, pregnant silence. 5 miles away, attorney Marcus Vale sat in his leather chair, the glow of 3 monitors reflected in his glasses. On the center screen, a recording of Victoria's face was frozen, the exact moment of her aggressive arrogance as she dropped the photo. Vale didn't move for a long time. His heart hammered against his ribs, not with fear, but with the cold, calculated fury of a hunter who had just seen the wolf step into the trap. He tapped a key, and the footage zoomed in. The camera, a state-of-the-art nanny cam hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Great Expectations, had a macrolens feature. It had captured everything. As Victoria had held the photo up to the light to gloat, the camera had focused through the thin, aged paper. The light from the fire had acted as a backlight, making the ink on the reverse side glow with perfect clarity. Vale looked at the 24 characters on his screen. He looked at the video of Victoria stirring the ashes. "You think you're a queen, Victoria?" Vale whispered to the empty room, his voice a jagged edge. "But you just committed a felony in 4K. You didn't just burn a memory. You burned your life." He picked up his phone and dialed a private number. It was the lead investigator for the state's Financial Crimes Division. "It's Vale," he said, his eyes never leaving the frozen image of the fire. "We have it. The destruction of evidence, the perjury setup, and the codes. She did exactly what we predicted. She couldn't help herself." Back in the Thompson manor, Lily remained on the floor. She reached out a finger, touching the cooling ash. She wasn't crying anymore. She knew Marcus Vale was watching. She knew that the green light in the bookshelf was her silent guardian. She looked up at the camera, a divine winner in the making, and for the first time in a year, she felt a flicker of the warmth her mother had always promised would return. Victoria Langford was upstairs, pouring a glass of vintage wine, toasted to her own brilliance. She looked in the mirror, practicing her grieving widow face for the hearing tomorrow, completely unaware that the countdown had reached 19 years, 11 months. And 29 days. The spark of doom had been lit, and the fire was only going to get hotter from here. The trap was set, the evidence was secured in the cloud, and Victoria Langford, dressed in her saturation blue suit of lies, was about to walk into a courtroom where the total ego death wouldn't just be a psychological concept, it would be her new reality. The Thompson Manor did not feel like a home. It felt like a museum dedicated to a woman who had never lived there. Under Victoria Langford's reign, every trace of the previous Mrs. Thompson, the warmth, the laughter, the smell of jasmine, had been scrubbed away with surgical precision. In their place sat cold marble, sharp-edged glass, and a suffocating, artificial silence. To Victoria, the house was a stage, and she was the undisputed Lady, a wicked queen whose primary objective was to ensure the only light that shone within these walls was her own. Lily lived in the house like a ghost haunting her own life. At 7 years old, she had learned the art of silent endurance, a survival mechanism born of necessity. She knew which floorboards creaked in the long, shadow-drenched hallway. She knew that if she breathed too loudly when Victoria was in one of her moods, she would be relegated to the windowless pantry for the night. She had become an expert at becoming invisible, a small, stoic figure moving through a world of oversized furniture and even larger threats. Victoria's rule was not one of physical blows, but of psychological erosion. She specialized in the total ego death of a child. Every morning, Lily was subjected to a ritual of inadequacy. Victoria would stand in the doorway of Lily's sparse room, a room that had once been a vibrant nursery, but was now a gray cell of minimalist design, and critique the very essence of the girl's existence. "Your hair is a mess, Lily. You look just like your mother did toward the end, haggard, weak, and utterly unremarkable," Victoria would say, her voice as smooth and cold as a polished blade. She would then spend an hour describing how she was sacrificing her youth and beauty to care for a child that wasn't hers, all while wearing designer silk robes purchased with Helena's inheritance. The manor itself seemed to conspire with Victoria. The high ceilings swallowed Lily's small voice, and the portraits on the walls, mostly of Victoria herself, commissioned in various poses of aggressive arrogance, seemed to watch the child's every move. Victoria had removed all the soft rugs, claiming they were dust traps, leaving only the cold, hard wood that amplified the sound of Victoria's sharp heels. Click, click, click. The sound was a metronome of anxiety for Lily. Whenever those heels approached, Lily's heart would hammer against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of neutral, stoic vulnerability. Victoria's narcissism was a hungry beast that required constant feeding. She hosted lavish dinner parties for the city's elite, where she would parade Lily out like a prop. In front of the guests, Victoria was the grieving guardian, her hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder. To the outsiders, it looked like affection. To Lily, it felt like a predator's talons digging into her skin, a silent warning that one wrong word or one tear would result in a week of isolation. "She's a difficult child," Victoria would sigh to a captivated audience of socialites, her eyes shimmering with fake tears. "So traumatized by her mother's passing that she's become quite delusional. It's a heavy burden, but I promised Helena I would see to it that Lily was managed." Lily would stand there, her crossed arms a shield, her gaze fixed on a point on the wall just above the guests' heads. She was the divine winner in waiting, though she didn't know it yet. She was collecting data. She saw the way Victoria's eyes darted toward the study whenever the topic of the estate arose. She saw the way Victoria's hands shook when a lawyer's name was mentioned. She saw the cracks in the Queen's armor long before the Queen herself did. Life under the shadow in the manor was a series of tests. Victoria would intentionally leave Helena's old jewelry on the vanity, waiting to see if Lily would touch it. If Lily so much as looked at a necklace with longing, Victoria would claim it was missing and accuse the child of being a thief, using the incident to further restrict Lily's world. It was a game of cat and mouse where the cat owned the house, the law, and the narrative. But the endurance was not without its purpose. In the silence of her grey room, Lily practiced remembering. She would close her eyes and reconstruct the photograph in her mind, the one Victoria had burned. She would trace the garden paths, the color of her mother's dress, and most importantly, the numbers on the back. She didn't know what the codes meant, only that her mother had whispered, "Keep this safe and you'll always be free," on the last night they spent together. Victoria's cruelty was her blind spot. She assumed that because she had taken the physical photo, she had taken the memory. She assumed that because Lily was silent, she was broken. She didn't realize that every time she belittled the child, she was merely forging a stronger, more resilient adversary. The wicked Queen was so obsessed with her own reflection in the manor's many mirrors that she failed to see the inception point being built right under her nose. One afternoon, Victoria decided that Lily's silence was a form of passive-aggressive rebellion. She cornered the child in the library, the scent of expensive perfume and gin surrounding her like a toxic cloud. "Why don't you speak, you little wretch?" Victoria demanded, her face inches from Lily's. The aggressive arrogance was on full display, her features contorted with a frustration she couldn't name. "I give you everything, this house, this life, and you look at me like I'm the dirt beneath your shoes." Lily didn't flinch. She looked directly into Victoria's dilated pupils, seeing the primal shock that was yet to come. "I'm just doing what you told me," Lily said, her voice steady and hauntingly calm. "I'm being invisible." Victoria's hand flew up, stopping just short of a strike. She knew the household staff, though loyal through fear, might talk if there were marks. Instead, she let out a jagged laugh. "Invisible is exactly what you'll be. When the estate is settled, I'm sending you to a school so far away and so cold that you'll forget your own name, and there won't be a single photo to remind you who you were." Victoria swept out of the library, the 20-year sentence she was building for herself invisible to her eyes. She felt powerful. She felt victorious. She went to her study to look at the forged documents that would give her total control of the Thompson fortune. Unaware that the shadow she had cast over Lily was actually providing the child with the perfect cover to wait for Marcus Vale's move. The manor was a pressure cooker of tension, a high-stakes conflict narrative where the villain was peak arrogance and the hero was peak patience. The shadow was thick, but it was in the deepest shadows that Lily Thompson learned how to see in the dark. She was no longer just a daughter. She was a survivor, waiting for the spark that would turn the wicked Queen's world into ash. The transition from the sterile, cold reality of Victoria's reign back into the warm, amber-hued memories of Helena Thompson was like stepping from a blizzard into a sunlit garden. This was the era before the shadow in the manor, a time when the Thompson estate was filled with the scent of blooming jasmine and the sound of soft piano melodies. But even in the light, there had been a creeping darkness. Helena Thompson had been many things: a mother, a philanthropist, a beauty, but toward the end she had become a strategist. She knew her time was a dwindling resource, and she knew the woman waiting in the wings, Victoria Langford, was not a friend, but a vulture. In the final weeks of her life, Helena's room had become a safe zone of desperate preparation. The secret vault wasn't just a physical location in a Swiss bank, it was a conceptual sanctuary for her daughter's future. Helena sat by the bay window, her frame frail but her eyes burning with an intense, divine clarity. She watched Lily playing on the lawn, unaware that the world was about to shift on its axis. Helena held the photograph, the one that would eventually become the inception point for Victoria's downfall. "Lily, come here, my brave little bird," Helena called, her voice a soft rasp. The young Lily, only 6 at the time, ran to her mother's side, her face an open book of love and stoic vulnerability. She climbed onto the bed, nesting into the silk pillows that smelled of her mother's fatting strength. Helena held the photo of them in the garden, the very image Victoria would one day watch shrivel into ash. "I need you to look at something," Helena whispered, flipping the photo over. On the white, matte backing, Helena had begun to write. She wasn't using a standard pen. She was using a special archival ink, the kind that soaked deep into the fibers, nearly invisible unless held against a specific frequency of light, or the intense, flickering glow of a fire. She began to scribe the 24 characters. Each letter was a link in a chain that would eventually bind Victoria Langford. "These are not just letters, Lily," Helena said, her gaze fixed on her daughter's eyes, impressing the gravity of the moment into the child's soul. "This is your voice when I am no longer here to speak for you. This is the key to the Thompson legacy, and it is the only thing that will keep you safe from the people who love gold more than they love people." Helena knew Victoria's flaw. She knew the woman's narcissism was so complete that she would never look past the surface. Victoria would see a photo of a rival and want to destroy the image, never dreaming that the paper itself held the 20-year sentence she was so greedily earning. Helena was banking on Victoria's aggressive arrogance. She was betting her daughter's life on the fact that a bully never looks at the back of the prize they've stolen. As Helena wrote the final character, a sharp, jagged Z, she felt a cold shiver. She could hear Victoria's voice in the hallway, already speaking to the estate lawyers, already practicing the grieving friend persona. The conflict narrative was already in motion. "Lily, you must promise me," Helena said, her grip on Lily's small hand tightening. "You will keep this under your mattress. You will never show it to Victoria. You will only show it to a man named Marcus Vale. He is the guardian of the light, Lily. Do you understand?" Lily nodded, her silent endurance beginning even then. She didn't fully grasp the high-stakes, legal battle brewing, but she understood the weight of her mother's fear. She watched as Helena blew on the ink, drying the evidence that would one day lead to a total ego death in a courtroom miles away and years in the future. The flashback reveals the technical execution of Helena's plan. She hadn't just hidden the codes. She had chosen this specific photo because she knew Victoria's psychological profile. Victoria hated Helena's smile. She hated the way the light hit Helena's hair in that specific garden. Helena knew that of all the things in the house, this photo would be the one Victoria would fixate on. It was a visual hacking of Victoria's own hatred. By putting the most important information on the back of the most hated object, Helena ensured the evidence would be exactly where the villain would eventually reach for it. "If she takes it, Lily," Helena whispered, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall, "let her. The fire will only reveal the truth. Remember that. The fire doesn't destroy the truth, it illuminates it." This was the inception of the trap. Helena was creating a story within a story. She was turning a sentimental keepsake into a legal landmine. She knew the stoplight palette of the future courtroom, the blue of Victoria's lies, the orange of the fire, and the cold, hard steel of justice. In those final hours, the room felt like a circle of protection. Helena spent the time teaching Lily how to memorize the patterns of the letters without knowing what they meant. It was a game to the child, a secret code between mother and daughter, but to Helena, it was a manual for survival. Every A, every 7, every X was a shield. When the time comes, The divine winner will be the one who kept the secret, Helena told her. She kissed Lily's forehead, her breath hitching as the door to the bedroom creaked open. Victoria Langford stood in the doorway, already dressed in a sharp, dark suit, her expression one of aggressive arrogance, masked by a thin veil of concern. "Helena, darling, the lawyers are here. You really shouldn't overexert yourself with the child." Helena tucked the photo under the duvet, her face becoming a mask of calm. "She's not just a child, Victoria, she's a Thompson, and she has a very long memory." Victoria let out a dismissive, melodic laugh, the same laugh she would use years later while stirring the ashes in the fireplace. "Memories are so heavy, aren't they? Don't worry, I'll make sure things are much lighter once you're gone." The memory faded as the young Lily watched Victoria's silhouette eclipse the sun streaming through the window. The shadow in the manor was officially falling, but beneath the mattress, in the dark, the secret vault was already waiting. The codes were set. The evidence trap was laid. Helena Thompson had died knowing that she had given her daughter more than just money. She had given her the ultimate weapon against a narcissist, the truth hidden in plain sight. Back in the present, Lily sat on the floor of the cold manor, her fingers tracing the spot where the photo had been. She could still feel the phantom heat of her mother's hand. She knew that total ego death was coming for Victoria. She knew that Marcus Vale was the guardian of the light her mother had promised. And as she looked at the fireplace, she realized her mother was right. The fire hadn't destroyed the codes. It had merely moved them from the paper into the inception screen of the digital world. The 20-year sentence was no longer a possibility, it was a mathematical certainty. The divine winner was just waiting for the gavel to fall. The office of Attorney Marcus Vale was a fortress of leather-bound books and flickering blue monitors, a stark contrast to the hollow marble halls of Thompson Manor. Marcus sat in the half-light of 3:00 a.m., his jaw set in a line of grim determination. He was a man who lived in the circle of protection, a legal gladiator who had spent his career dismantling the aggressive arrogance of social predators like Victoria Langford. But this case was different. This wasn't just about a multi-million-dollar estate fraud. It was about a promise made to a dying woman and the stoic vulnerability of a 7-year-old girl named Lily. Marcus adjusted his glasses, the reflection of the Thompson Manor blueprints dancing across the lenses. He knew Victoria was a narcissist of the highest order, the kind of villain who didn't just want the money, she wanted the total ego death of anyone who stood in her way. To catch her, he couldn't rely on standard subpoenas or polite requests for documents. Victoria would burn the world down before she handed over the truth. To stop her, Marcus needed to create an inception point, a hidden, digital eye that would capture the moment her perfect crime became her permanent undoing. The plan was a masterclass in visual hacking. Marcus had spent weeks researching the shadow in the manor, learning Victoria's patterns and her blind spots. He knew she spent her evenings in the library, sipping vintage gin and gloating over the forged documents that she believed would secure her reign. He also knew that Victoria's vanity was her greatest weakness. She was so convinced of her own intellectual superiority that she never suspected the very environment she controlled could be turned against her. Under the guise of a routine estate inventory required by the probate court, Marcus had entered the manor 3 days prior. Victoria had met him at the door, draped in high-saturation blue silk, her face a mask of patronizing boredom. "Really, Marcus," she had said, her voice dripping with a clinical, sharp condescension. "How many times must we count the silver? It's tedious, and it's upsetting poor Lily. The child is fragile enough as it is." Marcus had offered a neutral, professional smile, the kind that masked the divine winner energy he was already channeling. "Compliance is the shortest path to closure, Victoria. I'm sure you want this settled as much as the estate does." As Victoria turned to lead him into the dining room, her heels clicking a rhythm of aggressive arrogance on the hardwood, Marcus slipped a small, weighted object from his briefcase. It was a custom-bound, hollowed-out edition of Great Expectations. To the naked eye, it was just another relic of the Thompson Library, but inside its spine sat the Nanny Cam, a state-of-the-art 4K optical sensor with a macro lens capable of reading the fine print on a banknote from across the room. While Victoria was distracted by a phone call in the foyer, Marcus moved with the precision of a ghost. He stepped into the library and scanned the shelves. He chose a spot on the third shelf, directly opposite the grand fireplace. It was the evidence trap at its most literal. He knew that if Victoria ever found the photograph Lily was hiding, she wouldn't destroy it in a trash can. Her narcissist's heart would demand a ritual. She would want the fire. She would want to watch the memory turn to ash in the very hearth that had once belonged to Helena. He slid the book into place. A tiny, microscopic green light flickered once, the inception point coming online, and then went dark. The camera was now live, its feed encrypted and beamed directly to the servers in Marcus's office. "Everything in order, Mr. Vale." Victoria's voice had startled him, appearing in the doorway with the suddenness of a predator. Marcus didn't flinch. He turned slowly, his expression one of bored, legal stoicism. "Just checking the library's inventory, Victoria, a fine collection. It would be a shame if any of it were misplaced." Victoria let out a melodic, jagged laugh. "In this house, Marcus, everything is exactly where I want it to be." Back in his office, Marcus stared at the live feed. The library was empty, the fireplace cold. He was playing a high-stakes conflict narrative. If Victoria discovered the camera, she would sue him for privacy violations and use it as a pretext to have Lily removed from his legal protection. But if she didn't, if her ego remained as bloated as he predicted, she would walk right into the center of the frame. He watched as Lily entered the room on the screen. The child didn't know the camera was there, but she moved with a silent endurance that broke Marcus's heart. She sat by the cold hearth, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the shelf where the camera was hidden. For a moment, it felt as if she was looking right at him, a silent plea for the circle of protection to finally close. Marcus leaned back, his hands clasped behind his head. The 20-year sentence wasn't just a legal theory anymore, it was a digital ghost waiting to be summoned. He had seen the way Victoria looked at the Thompson fortune, not as a responsibility, but as a trophy. He had seen the scale distortion of her morality, where her own desires outweighed the life of a child. "She's going to do it, isn't she?" His associate, a young lawyer named Sarah, asked from the doorway. "She can't help herself," Marcus replied, his voice a jagged edge of certainty. "Narcissists like Victoria don't just win, they need to destroy the loser. She doesn't just want the money, she wants to erase Helena's very existence. She'll go for the photo, and when she does, she'll be holding the smoking gun in 4K resolution." The technical execution was flawless. The camera's AI was programmed to trigger high-speed capture at the detection of fire or sudden movement near the hearth. It was a story within a story. Victoria would think she was performing a private act of malice, while Marcus was producing a public record of a felony. The stoplight palette of the courtroom was already forming in Marcus's mind. He could see the primal shock on Victoria's face when he revealed the inception screen. He could see the total ego death as the high-saturation blue of her suit faded under the harsh fluorescent lights of a jail cell. "We are ready," Marcus whispered to the empty office. He looked at the photo of Helena on his desk, the one he had kept from his own days as her counsel. "The fire is coming, Victoria, but it's not going to burn the person you think." The countdown had officially begun. The nanny cam was the silent sentinel, the inception point that turned a domestic tragedy into a criminal landslide. Victoria Langford was still drinking her gin, still practicing her lies, still convinced of her divine winner status. She had no idea that her every move was being archived by the lawyer in the shadows. She had no idea that the spark of doom she was about to light would be the brightest evidence in the history of the Thompson estate. The clock in the grand hallway of Thompson Manor struck midnight, a heavy metallic toll that vibrated through the floorboards like a warning. For Lily, the sound was the beginning of the conflict narrative in its purest, most terrifying form. She lay in her bed, her small frame curled into a tight ball of stoic vulnerability, her hand pressed firmly against the mattress where the photograph was hidden. But the circle of protection she had built in her mind was about to be shattered. The door to her room didn't just open, it was thrown back with the aggressive arrogance of a queen entering a conquered territory. Victoria Langford stood in the doorway, her silhouette backlit by the cold, fluorescent light of the hallway. She was still wearing the high-saturation blue silk dress from earlier, but her hair was slightly disheveled, and her eyes burned with a frantic, predatory light. In her hand, she clutched a stack of forged bank documents, worthless papers that were missing the one thing Victoria craved more than life itself: the decryption codes to Helena's secret Swiss vault. "Where are they, Lily?" Victoria's voice was a low, jagged rasp, stripped of its usual melodic pretension. Lily didn't move, she didn't blink. She remained a divine winner in waiting, her silence a shield that Victoria was determined to splinter. "I don't know what you mean, Victoria." Victoria crossed the room in 3 sharp, predatory strides. She grabbed the edge of the duvet and ripped it back, exposing the child to the biting chill of the air-conditioned room. "Don't play the stoic with me, you little wretch. Your mother was a thief. She stole the future of this estate and hid it behind a wall of numbers. I've searched every inch of her study. I've torn through her digital files. There is a vault with $20 million, and I know she gave the access key to you." The midnight interrogation had begun. Victoria reached down and grabbed Lily by the shoulders, her manicured nails digging into the girl's skin. This was the total ego death Victoria was trying to force upon Lily, a complete breakdown of the child's will. Was it a book, a doll, a letter? Tell me where she hid the codes, or I swear I'll have you out on the street before the sun rises. Lily's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she channeled the memory of Helena's voice. The fire will only reveal the truth. She looked directly into Victoria's dilated pupils, seeing the desperation of a narcissist who realized her perfect crime was stalling. "My mother didn't give me any numbers," Lily lied, her voice a marvel of silent endurance. "She only gave me things to remember her by. She didn't care about the money, neither do I." Victoria let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed off the grey walls. "Liars, you and your mother were both sentimental fools. You think I don't see the way you clutched that mattress? You think I don't know you're hiding something?" With a violent shove, Victoria pushed Lily off the bed. The child hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud, her arms crossing instinctively over her chest. Victoria didn't hesitate. She threw the mattress aside, her face a mask of aggressive arrogance and greed. She was hunting for a ledger, a flash drive, or a piece of jewelry. And then she saw it. Taped to the underside of the bed frame was the faded, glossy photograph of Helena Thompson in the garden. Victoria's breath hitched. She ripped the photo from the wood, her hands shaking with a mixture of hatred and triumph. She stared at Helena's smiling face, the face of the woman who still held the power to make Victoria feel like an outsider in her own home. "This," Victoria spat, holding the photo inches from Lily's face. "This is what you've been protecting, this pathetic, sentimental scrap of paper." The technical execution of the trap was now in Victoria's own hands. She was holding the 20-year sentence, the very codes she was willing to kill for, yet her narcissism acted as a blindfold. To Victoria, the photo was a symbol of her competition, a visual anchor for Lily's loyalty to the dead. She was so blinded by her desire to inflict emotional pain that she didn't even think to flip the paper over. She didn't see the microscopic ink Helena had labored over. "I asked for the codes, Lily, not a picture of a ghost," Victoria screamed, her total ego death beginning to manifest as a loss of composure. "If you won't give me the money, then I will take the only thing you have left. I am going to erase her. I am going to burn this memory until there is nothing left but ash." Victoria turned toward the door, the photograph clutched in her fist like a captured flag. "Follow me," she commanded. "I want you to watch. I want you to see what happens to Helena's legacy." Lily stood up, her legs trembling but her mind sharp. She knew Marcus Vale was watching through the inception point in the library. She knew the nanny cam was waiting for this exact moment. As she followed Victoria down the long, shadowed hallway, Lily realized the midnight interrogation had backfired. Victoria hadn't found the codes by searching. She had found them by being a bully. The packing of the story accelerated as they reached the library. Victoria marched toward the hearth, the wicked queen, ready to perform her final act of domestic cleansing. She grabbed the silver poker and began to stir the dying embers, the clink 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 sounding like the ticking of a clock. "This is the end of the Thompson line, Lily," Victoria whispered, her face illuminated by the rising orange glow of the coals. No more photos, no more codes, just me. Victoria held the photo over the heat, the stoplight palette of the scene intensifying. The blue of her dress, the orange of the fire, and the dark shadows under her eyes created a portrait of a villain at the peak of her aggressive arrogance. She was unaware that she was being recorded in 4K. She was unaware that the very act of burning this photo was the inception of her own criminal conviction. Lily stood by the bookshelf, her eyes catching the tiny, microscopic green light behind Great Expectations. She didn't scream, she didn't plead. She remained the divine winner, watching as Victoria Langford prepared to trade 20 years of her life for a single moment of spite. "Watch closely, Lily," Victoria said, her eyes fixed on the flames. "This is what happens when you try to hide things from me." The photo touched the embers. The spark of doom was lit, and in that moment, the midnight interrogation became the most important evidence in the history of the Thompson estate. Victoria had the prize in her hand, and she was watching it burn, never realizing she had just destroyed her only leverage and guaranteed her own total ego death in a courtroom that was already waiting for her. The library of Thompson Manor was an architectural masterpiece of mahogany and shadow, but to Victoria Langford, it was currently a sanctuary of absolute purification. She stood before the grand hearth, the silver poker in her right hand feeling like a scepter of finality. The wicked queen had reached the zenith of her aggressive arrogance. As she stared into the glowing heart of the fireplace, her internal monologue was a symphony of self-congratulation. Finally, she thought, her eyes reflecting the dancing orange light, the last vestige of the Thompson girl's pathetic resistance is within my grasp. I am not just taking the fortune, I am taking the air she breathes. Victoria looked down at the photograph in her left hand. The visual anchor of Lily's hope was a small, glossy rectangle that felt insignificant against the scale of her ambition. To Victoria, the photo was a biological contaminant, a reminder that she was the second wife, the interloper, the replacement. Helena was always so soft, so loved, Victoria mused, her lip curling in a silent snarl of total ego death avoidance. But love doesn't pay for the silk on my back or the gin in my glass. Power does, and power is what remains when the sentiment is burned away. She didn't even glance at the back of the photo. Why would she? Her narcissism was a structural barrier to curiosity. She was so convinced that Lily was hiding the vault codes in a digital drive or a ledger that the idea of them being written on a sentimental scrap was beneath her intellect. The child is a fool, just like her mother, Victoria thought, her pulse quickening with the high-stakes adrenaline of the moment. She thinks her silence is a shield. She doesn't realize that in my house, silence is just a vacuum I fill with my own will. "Look at it, Lily," Victoria commanded, her voice dropping into a register of clinical cruelty. She held the photo out, just inches from the rising heat. "This is the moment your mother truly dies, not in a hospital bed, but here, in the fire, where no one can ever look at her face again." Lily stood by the bookshelf, her stoic vulnerability radiating a cold, quiet energy that Victoria mistook for total defeat. "Look at her," Victoria gloated internally. "No tears, no screams. I've finally broken the spirit. She's watching her world end, and she's already accepted it. I am the divine winner. I have won the Thompson War without firing a single shot." The technical execution of the burning began with a slow, deliberate movement. Victoria lowered the corner of the photo into the embers. The gloss of the paper bubbled for a fraction of a second, a tiny chemical protest before the first lick of orange flame took hold. Victoria watched with aggressive arrogance as the fire climbed the edges of the photograph. Yes, she thought, a frantic warmth spreading through her chest. Burn the garden, burn the smile, burn the legacy. As the flames consumed the image of Helena Thompson, a strange phenomenon occurred, one that Victoria was too blinded by spite to interpret. The heat caused the archival ink on the reverse side to react, the hidden alphanumeric codes glowing momentarily with a sharp, fluorescent clarity before the paper disintegrated. To Victoria, it was just the spark of doom, a natural part of the destruction. She didn't realize that the nanny cam, hidden behind Great Expectations, was capturing every single glowing character in high-definition 4K. "It's gone," Victoria's mind sang as the photo curled into a blackened, unrecognizable husk. The codes are gone, the photo is gone, and the leverage is gone. I don't need the vault keys tonight. I'll break the girl further tomorrow, or I'll find another way to forge the signatures. But for now, I have the peace of the grave. She dropped the remains of the photo into the center of the fire and used the silver poker to crush the charred fragments into a fine gray powder. She stirred the ashes with a rhythmic, hypnotic clink, 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 ensuring that not even a square millimeter of the evidence remained. I am the architect of my own destiny, she thought, her face illuminated by the dying glow. No lawyer, no judge, and certainly no orphan can touch me now. I have committed the perfect crime of erasure. Victoria turned away from the fireplace, smoothing her high-saturation blue dress with a gesture of regal finality. She felt a sense of total ego-death reversal. She felt larger than the room, larger than the law. "Go to bed, Lily," she said, her voice a sill-cracked threat. "And remember the smell of that smoke. It's the smell of your new reality." As Victoria swept out of the library, her heels clicking a triumphant beat on the marble, her internal monologue reached its crescendo. "Tomorrow, I walk into court as the grieving widow. I will swear I searched for the estate papers. I will swear I tried to protect the child's interests. And when they ask for proof, I will point to my empty hands and my broken heart. Who would ever believe a 7-year-old over a woman of my standing?" She reached her master bedroom and poured a glass of vintage gin, her reflection in the mirror showing a woman at the peak of her power. "I am untouchable," she whispered to her reflection. The fire hid everything. She was unaware that 5 miles away, Marcus Vale was already reviewing the Inception Point footage. She was unaware that the very ashes of evidence she had created were actually the glowing coals of her own 20-year sentence. Her triumph was a phantom, a story within a story that was about to reach its final, devastating chapter. Victoria Langford had just traded her entire future for the satisfaction of watching a photo burn, and as she drifted into a smug, dreamless sleep, the divine winner was already being crowned in the shadows. The library was quiet now, save for the occasional pop of a cooling coal. Lily remained for a moment, the scent of the smoke stinging her nostrils but her heart feeling strangely light. She looked at the bookshelf, at the tiny green light that Victoria had never seen. The evidence trap was full. The conflict narrative was moving toward its climax, and as Lily walked toward the door, she knew that while the photo was gone, the truth had never been brighter. The wicked queen had burned her own throne, and the fire was only getting started. The morning of the estate hearing arrived with a cold, piercing clarity that seemed to sharpen the edges of the city's skyscrapers. Inside the hallowed wood-paneled halls of the Justice Center, the air was thick with the scent of floor wax and the heavy electric tension of an impending total ego death. Victoria Langford stepped out of her town car, her heels striking the pavement with the rhythmic, predatory precision of a war drum. She was dressed in a high-saturation light blue suit, a shade so vibrant it seemed to hum against the gray stone of the courthouse. It was a calculated choice, designed to project an image of serene innocence, a stoplight palette strategy intended to signal to the judge that she was the victim, the divine winner of a tragic family drama. As she marched toward the courtroom, Victoria's internal monologue was a fortress of aggressive arrogance. "Today is the day the Thompson legacy officially becomes the Langford Empire," she thought, her lips curved in a faint, practiced smile of stoic vulnerability. The fire took the evidence. The ashes are cold. There is nothing left for Marcus Vale to pull out of his dusty briefcase but theories and desperation. She felt invincible, a wicked queen approaching her coronation, unaware that she was walking directly into the center of a conflict narrative she no longer controlled. The courtroom doors swung open, and Victoria entered with a flourish of silk. She took her seat at the petitioner's table, her posture perfect, her gaze avoiding the circle of protection where Lily Thompson sat beside attorney Marcus Vale. Lily looked small in the oversized wooden chair, her arms crossed in her signature stoic vulnerability, her face a mask of neutral calm. To Victoria, the girl looked defeated. "Look at her," Victoria mused, smoothing the lapel of her blue jacket. "She's already accepted her fate. She knows that without that photo, she is nothing but a ward of the state I control." Marcus Vale, however, was a different story. He sat with a stillness that was almost surgical, his eyes fixed on a stack of folders. He didn't look like a man who had lost his primary evidence. He looked like a hunter who had just felt the tripwire snap. When he finally looked up, his gaze met Victoria's for a fleeting second. There was no fear in his eyes, only a cold, technical execution of a plan that had been years in the making. "All rise," the bailiff intoned, and the Honourable Judge Margaret Thorne took the bench. The judge was a woman of authoritative finality, her grey hair pulled back in a tight bun, her eyes sharp enough to cut through the most sophisticated legal lies. "We are here today to finalize the estate of Helena Thompson," Judge Thorne began, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "Mrs. Langford, you are petitioning for full control of the Thompson Trust, citing a lack of original documentation regarding the Swiss holdings. Is that correct?" Victoria stood up, her movements fluid and rehearsed. "That is correct, Your Honor," she said, her voice a masterpiece of grieving widow performance. "It is a tragedy, truly. I have searched the manor from top to bottom. I have looked through every ledger, every drawer. But Helena, she was always so disorganized toward the end. I fear the access codes were lost with her. As Lily's only guardian, I am simply trying to ensure the estate is managed properly to provide for the child's future." It was a bold-faced lie, a masterpiece of aggressive arrogance delivered with a tremor of fake emotion. Victoria sat back down, a sense of total ego death avoidance fueling her confidence. She had sworn under oath. She had committed perjury with the grace of a prima ballerina. She looked at Marcus Vale, waiting for the courtroom ambush she expected, a series of weak questions about her search methods or a desperate plea for more time. Instead, Marcus Vale stood up slowly, his hands resting on the edge of the table. "Your Honor," he said, his voice a low, jagged edge of certainty, "the petitioner is correct about one thing. The physical photograph containing the vault codes is indeed missing. However, she is mistaken about the reason." Victoria felt a flicker of primal shock in her chest, but she suppressed it. "He's bluffing," she told herself. "He has nothing. The ashes were grey. I stirred them myself." "I would like to call a surprise witness to the stand," Marcus continued, his eyes finally locking onto Victoria. "But not a person. I would like to introduce Exhibit A digital record from the Thompson Library, captured at 12:04 a.m. on the night of the 14th. The inception screen behind the judge flickered to life. Victoria's heart skipped a beat, then began to hammer against her ribs with the force of a trapped animal. The screen showed the Thompson Library in high definition, 4K. The scale distortion of the wide-angle lens made the room look vast, but the focus was tight on the fireplace. "What is this?" Victoria hissed, her aggressive arrogance beginning to crumble into total ego death. "This is a violation of privacy. This is an illegal recording." "It is a court-ordered security measure, Mrs. Langford," Marcus replied, his voice cutting through her protest like a guillotine. "Installed to protect the physical assets of the estate, and what it captured is far more than just a security breach." On the screen, the Victoria from the video entered the frame. She was holding the photo. She was holding the 20-year sentence. The courtroom fell into a deafening silence as the video played. Every person in the room watched as the digital Victoria stirred the embers. They watched as she held the photo of Helena Thompson over the heat. The stoplight palette of the video was undeniable, the orange of the fire against the high-saturation blue of the very suit Victoria was wearing in the courtroom. It was a moment of catastrophe captured for eternity. The judge leaned forward, her face a mask of authoritative finality. "Is that you in the video, Mrs. Langford?" Judge Thorne asked, her voice dropping into a register of icy judgment. Victoria couldn't speak. Her total ego death was manifesting as a physical paralysis. She looked at the screen, then at the judge, then at Lily. Lily wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at Victoria, her eyes filled with the divine winner energy of a child who had finally been seen. "We are watching the intentional destruction of court-ordered evidence," Marcus Vale stated, his voice echoing in the silent chamber. "But more importantly, Your Honor, the macrolens on this inception point captured something Mrs. Langford failed to see. If we pause the frame at 12 minutes and 4 seconds. The video froze. The technical execution of Helena's plan was revealed. The fire behind the paper had illuminated the reverse side, making the vault codes glow with a sharp, fluorescent clarity. They were right there, projected on the Inception screen for the whole world to see. Victoria's jaw dropped. Her mouth opened in a silent, primal shock. The wicked queen realized in that singular, devastating second that she hadn't burned a memory. She had burned her life. She had performed a felony in front of a digital audience, and she had just lied about it under oath. "Bailiff," Judge Thorne said, her voice like a thunderclap, "take the petitioner into custody. We are moving beyond estate law. This is now a criminal investigation into perjury and the destruction of evidence." The courtroom ambush was complete. As the handcuffs clicked around Victoria's wrists, the high-saturation blue of her suit seemed to bleed into the gray of the courtroom. The divine winner had been crowned, and the total ego death of the antagonist was absolute. The courtroom was a vacuum of oxygen as Victoria Langford took the witness stand. The wicked queen moved with a calculated, rhythmic elegance, her high-saturation blue suit shimmering under the harsh fluorescent lights like a warning. She sat with her spine perfectly aligned, a portrait of aggressive arrogance masked by the thin, brittle veil of stoic vulnerability. To Victoria, the oath she had just taken was a mere formality, a minor obstacle in the conflict narrative. She believed she was still directing. She placed her hand on the Bible not as a pledge of truth, but as a tactical maneuver to solidify her divine winner status. Attorney Marcus Vale stood at his desk, his presence radiating authoritative finality. He didn't rush to the podium. He allowed the silence to stretch, forcing Victoria to sit in the weight of her own pride. The scale distortion in the room was palpable. Victoria felt like a giant, untouchable and supreme, while Marcus was merely a fly buzzing around the edges of her empire. "Mrs. Langford," Marcus began, his voice a low, jagged edge of clinical precision. "Let us speak plainly about the assets of the Thompson estate, specifically the photograph that Lily Thompson kept in her possession, a photograph of her mother, Helena, which contained specific alphanumeric strings on the reverse side. Did you, at any point during the night of the 14th, see or handle this photograph?" Victoria leaned forward, her face a masterpiece of grieving widow performance. She looked directly at Judge Thorne, her pupils dilated with the sheer, intoxicating rush of her own lie. "Mr. Vale, I have already told the court. I have searched the manor with the utmost diligence. I have gone through every sentimental scrap the child possesses in hopes of finding the estate's missing information. I have never seen such a photograph. If Lily claims I did, I can only attribute it to her tragic, grief-stricken delusions." The perjury and pride was now officially on the record. Victoria felt a surge of triumph. She had looked the law in the eye and blinked first. In her mind, the ashes of evidence were her ultimate shield. The fire took the ink, she thought, her internal monologue a symphony of total ego death avoidance. The smoke took the truth. There is no paper, so there is no crime. "So to be absolutely clear for the record," Marcus continued, packing the length of the safe zone between the tables, "you are swearing, under penalty of perjury, that you did not enter the library at midnight, that you did not confront Lily Thompson, and that you did not intentionally destroy a piece of evidence vital to this multi-million-dollar probate case." Victoria let out a soft, melodic laugh, the same jagged sound that had echoed in the library while the photo burned. "I was asleep by 11, Mr. Vale. My doctors can attest to the sedatives I require to cope with the loss of my dear Helena. The idea that I would harass a child over a photo that doesn't exist is not only offensive, it is legally absurd. I saw no codes. I saw no photo. I saw nothing but the shadows of a lonely house." The aggressive arrogance in her voice was a physical weight. She adjusted her blue cuff, her eyes flickering toward Lily. She expected to see the child crumbling, but instead, she saw the stoic vulnerability had vanished. Lily was sitting tall, her gaze fixed on the Inception Point monitor behind the judge. "Your Honor," Marcus Vale said, his voice dropping into a register of cold, technical execution, "the petitioner's pride is as vast as her dishonesty. She believes that because she destroyed the physical evidence, the truth has been erased. She believes her blue suit of innocence can hide the black heart of her actions." "Get to the point, Mr. Vale," Judge Thorne commanded, her expression unreadable. "The point, Your Honor, is that Victoria Langford is currently committing a felony in your presence," Marcus said, turning toward the inception screen. She swears the photo never existed. She swears she never saw the codes. She swears she was asleep while the truth was being turned to ash. I would like to move for the immediate playback of Exhibit A, the high-definition recording from the Thompson Library. Victoria's primal shock began as a cold trickle down her spine. Recording, her mind screamed. There were no cameras. I checked the corners. I checked the vents. She watched as the bailiff dimmed the lights, the stoplight palette of the courtroom shifting into the dark, cinematic tones of the moment of catastrophe. The screen flickered to life. The technical execution of Marcus Vale's trap was revealed in stunning 4K clarity. There on the massive monitor was the library. There was the fireplace. And there, entering the frame with the aggressive arrogance of a predator, was Victoria. She was wearing the exact same high-saturation blue suit she was wearing in the witness stand. The contrast was a psychological hammer. The Victoria on the screen was a villain. The Victoria in the chair was a liar. The courtroom watched in breathless silence as the video Victoria grabbed Lily. They heard the jagged rasp of her voice. I am going to burn this memory until there is nothing left but ash. Victoria felt the total ego death beginning. The floor of the witness stand seemed to tilt. Her perjury and pride were being dismantled second by second. She watched her own hands stir the embers. She watched the photo touch the fire. Stop it, Victoria shrieked, her voice breaking the authoritative finality of the room. That's a deepfake. It's a fabrication. Marcus Vale is trying to frame me. The metadata is verified, Mrs. Langford, Marcus said, his voice a thunderclap of justice. But look closer at the fire. Look at what your pride prevented you from seeing. The video zoomed in. The macro lens of the nanny cam captured the inception point of the codes. As the photo burned, the fire acted as a backlight, illuminating the reverse side. The 24 alphanumeric characters glowed like white-hot ghosts against the blackening paper. You swore you never saw the codes, Marcus said, stepping toward the stand, his scale now dwarfing the cowering Victoria. Yet here they are, projected from your own hands. You swore the photo never existed, yet here is the footage of you committing a felony to destroy it. Your pride didn't just blind you, Victoria, it convicted you. The total ego death was complete. Victoria's mouth hung open in a mask of primal shock. The high-saturation blue of her suit now looked like a prison uniform in waiting. She looked at Judge Thorne, but the judge's face was a stone wall of authoritative finality. Bailiff, the judge said, her voice cutting through Victoria's panicked gasps. Remove the witness from the stand and place her under arrest for perjury, destruction of evidence, and felony fraud. This hearing is now a criminal proceeding. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, the wicked queen finally fell. The divine winner was not the woman in the blue suit, but the small girl in the safe zone who had simply told the truth. The 20-year sentence was no longer a threat, it was a promise. The courtroom transformed into a theater of total ego death the moment Marcus Vale tapped the touchscreen on his mahogany desk. The lights dimmed automatically, plunging the room into a deep, cinematic shadow, save for the massive inception screen mounted behind the judge's bench. This was the moment of the absolute reversal, the moment of catastrophe, where the predator becomes the prey. Victoria Langford sat frozen in the witness stand, her high-saturation blue suit now appearing garish and fluorescent against the dark wood. Her aggressive arrogance was a brittle shell, vibrating with the first tremors of a primal shock that would soon shatter her entire reality. Look at the screen, Mrs. Langford, Marcus Vale commanded, his voice echoing with authoritative finality. Look at the woman you were when you thought no one was watching. The video began to play in 4K resolution. The quality was so crisp that the courtroom could see the fine texture of the wallpaper in the Thompson Library and the erratic, jagged movement of the flames in the hearth. The Victoria on the screen was a masterclass in villainous hubris. She was seen entering the library with a predatory stride, her face twisted into a mask of smug superiority. The audio was crystal clear. The technical execution of the nanny cam had captured the visceral clink-clink-clink of the silver poker against the grate. On the screen, Victoria's voice rang out, a sharp, jagged rasp that contrasted violently with the grieving widow persona she had just performed for the judge. She's finally erased, Lily, and now every trace of her is gone too. The physical Victoria in the witness stand let out a small, strangled gasp. Her total ego death began with a subtle, involuntary twitch of her left eye. Her pupils, which had been dilated with pride only moments ago, began to pin fire with terror. The scale distortion of the courtroom felt like it was shifting. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in like the bars of the 20-year sentence she had just earned. "Is that not your voice, Victoria?" Marcus asked, his tone clinical and cold. "Is that not the blue suit you chose for its innocent hue, the same suit you wore while committing a felony?" Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her primal shock was manifesting as a complete loss of her linguistic armor. She watched the screen as her digital self held the photograph of Helena Thompson, the inception point of the entire disaster. She watched her own fingers, manicured and steady on the video, lower the corner of the photo into the orange glow of the embers. The courtroom collective held its breath. The stoplight palette on the screen was mesmerizing, the deep blue of Victoria's sleeve, the violent orange of the fire, and the stark white of the paper as it began to curl. As the flames took hold, Marcus Vale hit a key to slow the footage to 10% speed. "Now, Your Honor, watch the back of the photograph," Marcus said, stepping into the safe zone directly in front of the stand. In slow motion, the technical execution of Helena Thompson's final act was revealed. As the heat intensified, the paper became translucent. The fire acted as a powerful backlight, and suddenly the hidden ink began to glow. The alphanumeric codes, the keys to the secret vault, shone through the paper like white-hot neon. They were visible for 3 full seconds before the paper dissolved into black ash. Victoria's face on the witness stand underwent a terrifying transformation. Her aggressive arrogance didn't just fade, it curdled. Her jaw dropped further than humanly possible, her skin turning a gray, ashen color that matched the debris in the fireplace. This was the literal crumbling of her superiority. She realized that she hadn't just destroyed a memory, she had broadcasted the very evidence she was trying to bury. Her pride had been her blindfold, and now the blindfold had been ripped away to reveal a cliff's edge. "You stirred those ashes for 2 minutes, Victoria," Marcus noted, his voice a thunderclap of judgment. "You made sure the physical evidence was gone, but you forgot that in the digital age, nothing is ever truly burned. You didn't just commit perjury, you provided the state with a high-definition confession." Victoria's hands, which had been resting regally on the railing of the stand, began to shake. She clenched them into fists, her knuckles turning white, but it was too late to project strength. The total ego death was complete. She looked toward the back of the courtroom, perhaps searching for an exit or a friendly face, but she only met the circle of protection. Lily Thompson was standing now, her arms no longer crossed. The child was standing tall, her face neutral and calm, the divine winner who had survived the wicked queen's fire. The judge leaned forward, her expression one of authoritative finality. "The court has seen enough. Mrs. Langford, your testimony was not only false, it was a calculated assault on the justice system. You have sat in that chair and lied to this court while the truth was being projected behind your head." The bailiff stepped forward, the metallic clink of the handcuffs sounding like a death knell in the silent room. Victoria didn't fight. She couldn't. Her ego had been her only source of power, and it had been annihilated by a 4K sensor and a silver poker. As she was led out of the stand, her knees buckled, and she had to be supported by the bailiff, a final, pathetic image of a fallen tyrant. The moment of catastrophe was over, and the revenge arc had reached its peak. Victoria Langford was no longer the mistress of Thompson Manor. She was a criminal defendant in a blue suit that now looked like a costume. The inception screen went black, but the image of the glowing codes remained burned into the minds of everyone in the room. Marcus Vale turned to Lily and offered a gentle, authoritative smile. The evidence trap had worked perfectly. The wicked queen had been unmasked by her own hand, and the divine winner was finally going home to a house that was no longer haunted by a shadow. The courtroom was filled with a heavy, expectant silence as Judge Margaret Thorne prepared to deliver the final blow to the crumbling empire of Victoria Langford. The air felt thick, charged with the ozone of a storm that had finally broken. Victoria stood at the defense table, her high-saturation blue suit now wrinkled and stripped of its former glory. Her total ego death was complete. She no longer stood with aggressive arrogance, but slumped, her eyes hollow and fixed on the floorboards she had once walked upon like a goddess. Across the aisle, in the safe zone of the plaintiff's table, Lily Thompson stood with authoritative finality. She was no longer the trembling child from the shadow in the manor. She was the divine winner, a silent testament to the endurance of the truth. Victoria Langford, Judge Thorne began, her voice resonating like a thunderclap through the chamber. This court has presided over many cases of greed, but rarely have we seen such a calculated merger of financial fraud and psychological cruelty. You did not merely steal from an estate. You attempted to incinerate the identity and the future of a child who was placed in your care. You lied under oath, you destroyed court-ordered evidence, and you did so with a smirk that this court will not soon forget. The judge looked down at the sentencing report, her expression one of authoritative finality. For the charges of felony perjury, grand larceny of the Thompson Trust, and the intentional destruction of evidence vital to a criminal proceeding, I am sentencing you to the maximum term allowed by law. You are hereby sentenced to 20 years in a state correctional facility without the possibility of early parole. A sharp, collective intake of breath echoed through the gallery. Victoria's knees buckled. The 20-year sentence was no longer text anchor on a thumbnail. It was a physical weight, a cage that would hold her until her beauty had faded, and her name was a footnote in a case study on narcissism. The primal shock that had started during the video playback now settled into a permanent, cold reality. As the bailiff stepped forward to lead her away, Victoria made the mistake of looking back at Lily. She expected to see spite. She expected to see a reflection of her own aggressive arrogance in the child's eyes. But Lily Thompson offered her something far more devastating: indifference. Lily didn't need to scream or gloat. The law had become her shield, and Marcus Vale her sword. Victoria was led through the side door, the metallic clink of her chains the final note in her conflict narrative. The wicked queen was gone, her throne reduced to the very ash she had stirred in the library. Marcus Vale placed a steady, protective hand on Lily's shoulder. "It's over, Lily," he whispered, his voice a circle of protection. "The manor is yours, the legacy is safe, and more importantly, you are free." The technical execution of the legal victory was absolute. With the vault codes recovered from the inception point footage, Helena's secret trust had been unlocked. The millions Victoria had tried to claw away were now legally bound to Lily's future, managed by a board of trustees who actually cared for her well-being. But as they walked out of the courtroom and into the bright, untainted sunlight of the afternoon, the money felt like the least important part of the victory. Waiting at the bottom of the courthouse steps was a couple Lily had only seen in old photographs, her maternal aunt and uncle, who had been fighting Victoria's restrictive guardianship for years. They stepped forward, their faces filled with a warmth that Victoria could never have simulated. This was the final resolution of the emotional arc. Lily didn't hesitate. She ran toward them, her stoic vulnerability finally melting into a genuine, heartfelt embrace. Marcus Vale watched from the top of the steps, a divine winner in his own right. He looked at the city skyline, then back at the digital tablet in his hand. The footage of the fire was still there, but he knew he would never need to play it again. The evidence trap had served its purpose. The inception point had captured the dark so that Lily could live in the light. As Lily was led away by her new guardians, she stopped for a moment and looked back at the Justice Center. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small new object. It was a replica of the photograph Victoria had burned, a gift from Marcus, who had used the high-definition stills from the nanny cam to reconstruct the image of Helena laughing in the garden. The visual anchor was back in her hands, but this time there were no codes hidden on the back. There was no need for secrets anymore. "Goodbye, Victoria," Lily whispered to the wind. The story of the Thompson Manor would be told for years, a masterclass in justice porn that reminded the world that karma always comes around. The girl who had been forced into the shadows had emerged as the brightest light in the room. The fire that was meant to destroy her mother's memory had instead illuminated the path to her salvation. The shadow in the manor had been lifted. The wicked queen was in a cell, and the divine winner was finally going home. The 20-year sentence had begun for one, but for Lily Thompson, life was just beginning. The story concludes with a profound sense of revenge arc completion. Victoria Langford's total ego death was not just a legal defeat, but a psychological collapse. By the time she reached the prison processing center, the high-saturation blue suit was replaced by orange denim, a literal stoplight palette shift that signaled the end of her freedom. Lily, meanwhile, moved into a life of genuine safe zone protection, her mother's legacy secured not just by money, but by the truth. This narrative serves as a warning to the aggressive arrogance of the world. It proves that a narcissist's greatest weapon, their desire to destroy the spirit of others, is also their greatest vulnerability. Victoria was so focused on the moment of catastrophe for Lily that she failed to see her own. The story teaches us that the divine winner is not the one with the most power, but the one with the most truth. If you felt the satisfaction of that 20-year sentence being read, give this video a thumbs up. If you believe that no one is above the law, subscribe and hit the bell icon to join our community of justice seekers. Share this story with a friend who needs a reminder that the truth doesn't burn, it only glows brighter in the dark.